Hi there, and welcome to this lecture, where I'll give some helpful tips and insights on how to administer and debrief the AEM-Cube in an online setting. My name is Richard Robertson. I'm a partner at Human Insight, and with a background in social and organizational psychology, I am mostly responsible for the development of our content, our products, and our trainings. As such, I have done more AEM-Cube debriefs and trainings than I can count, both offline and online. And since we have received quite a few questions on how to do these debriefs in an online setting, we thought it might be worthwhile to spend some time on the subject. As you can see, I'm recording this lecture at home, or rather, from my parents' home in Alphen aan den Rijn, where I'm staying to celebrate Easter, keeping the 1.5 meters distance, of course. First off, I want to say that I hope everyone who is watching this lecture is healthy and is able to find their way through this testing time. And yes, this is a testing time for everyone, and no less so in the fields of advising, coaching, and teaching. Doing online debriefs seems especially relevant in a period like this, where our normal in-person work has been disrupted and we necessarily need to look for other options. However, knowing how to do AEM-Cube sessions online will stay relevant, also when things are looking up again and eventually return to normalcy, which they will. When that client just isn't able to meet up but still really wants to do the debrief. When you're working with an international client and there is no opportunity to fly over. Or when you're working with an international client with participants in different locations. There are lots of different scenarios where it can be really useful to just plan in an online session and make sure the work can continue without you needing to actually be in the room. Human Insight's core mission is to enable our partners to work with our concepts and tools, and we want to support them in every way possible. However, over the last few years, we've done more and more business abroad, and we've been fortunate enough to have gained some amazing clients in areas like the US, Australia, Canada, and Africa. Usually, we'll always want to work together with one or more partners. But if we don't have partners yet in a given region, we'll have to take on these engagements ourselves. And since it's usually not feasible to keep traveling there for different individual and team sessions, we have done quite a bit of experimenting with completing these online and have gained quite a bit of experience in it. Whether it's a series of 40 individual debriefs over a period of weeks, management or C-level debriefs, or even doing a whole day teaching session, by now we've experienced them all and have seen what works very well in an online session and some things that you might want to take into account or change from doing your offline sessions. First off, it should be said that yes, the AEM-Cube can be used very successfully online. It might be a little more challenging and the interaction and dynamics will definitely be more limited than in a real-life, in-person debrief. But you'll find that it'll be very doable to explain the concept, debrief the reports, and have a good, in-depth discussion, even if you're not in the room yourself. Especially since it's a non-judgmental tool and it's performance-focused, designed to help people gain insights into their preferences, their natural contributions, and how to get the most out of these, people often find it safe enough to engage in dialogue about it and are more times than not open to the experience of discussing these topics online. In this lecture, I will go into two different situations: the one-on-one coaching debrief and the team debrief, how they differ from regular in-person sessions and how to make the most out of these. Hopefully, you'll find some useful tidbits in here to get the most out of your online AEM-Cube sessions, starting with the one-on-one coaching debrief. The one-on-one debrief is the most straightforward online session of the two, and you'll find that this can be done very well with minor adjustments from your normal in-person sessions. You want to prepare well for the session. Since you're not in the room together, you want a good, stable connection with clear audio, video, and screen sharing options. If someone doesn't agree with something, is skeptical, or gets emotional for whatever reason, it will be slightly more difficult to use your mimic, body language, and physical presence to get them on board or comfort them. Make sure your connection and communication options are good enough so nothing important gets lost here due to poor infrastructure. On that note, make sure you have a clear goal for the debrief. The online setting works perfectly well for a good objective look at the concept and the tool, but if you expect the person on the other end to be or get very stressed or emotional, it might be better to postpone the session if possible, since it probably will be better to be in the room to support him or her and give him or her the warmth and comfort he or she might need. I once had a client who, during our video call, started to realize why he had been losing energy in work over the last couple of years. And this was quite an emotional realization for him. We took extra time for the call and went into it quite deeply. He reflected that it was an insightful session, but we still decided that it would be worthwhile to continue the coaching offline due to the sensitive nature and the emotional bearing of the subject matter. Given the AEM-Cube's focus on people's strengths and natural preferences and how to get the most out of these, this probably won't happen too often, but it is worth keeping in mind when preparing the session. One big difference to take into account is the length of the session. You want to take more time for an online debrief than for an offline debrief. If, for example, you normally take 90 minutes for an AEM-Cube debrief, you probably want to plan in 2 hours for an online debrief. One reason is because there might be technical glitches or hiccups that get in the way and that take time away from your session. I have had a few sessions where, due to timing connectivity issues, I'd be sitting in an empty online meeting room for about 15 minutes. But since I always take more time for my online session, this has rarely turned into a problem. In the few instances where we did end up with too little time, I choose beforehand to try and reschedule rather than to try and cram in the session in half the time. Another reason is because communication will naturally go less fluent and smooth. You will have more static questions and answers, taking more time in the communication. Finally, people will sometimes find it difficult to sit down and stay focused for the entire duration of the session, so you might want to plan in 1 or more breaks if necessary. Whether to send the AEM-Cube report before or during the session remains the same consideration as for the offline session. Sending the report before the session allows the participant to read through the report, take it in, and prepare themselves for the session. On the other hand, sending the report during the session gives you the opportunity to take the participant through the report during the conversation and make sure they don't interpret things in the wrong way. If sending the report during the session, though, you want to prepare the email beforehand and just have it ready during the session, so there's minimal downtime in you preparing the email, searching the document, etc. Make sure you have it ready to go so you can just press send when the moment calls for it. This is also a great moment for a 5 or 10 minute break as you wait for the report to transfer. Alternatively, You can use screen sharing to simply show the report during the call. And while easier logistically, it does make it more static for the participant. I personally always like to start the call off with a lengthy introduction and background of the participant. Then share the report during the call and take a 10-minute break if the time allows for it, to allow the participant to take an initial look at the report. After that, we'll immediately come back and I'll take the participant through the report and we'll discuss as we go along. That's, of course, one way to do it, but I also know very successful partners who prefer to send the report before the session, either just before it starts or longer before, so the participant has ample time to process the report entirely. What you prefer is up to you. One thing that is hard to take into account online is the amount of distraction your participant might have. In one instance, I was explaining the report and I could actually see my client's screen reflected in her glasses. I couldn't make out all the details, but it looked like one of those free-to-play farming games you can find online. Whatever it was, she definitely wasn't looking at her AEM-Cube report. So I wasn't too surprised when she didn't ask too many questions at the end of her session. Regarding this point, I'm pretty straightforward. As a coach or consultant, all you can do is give it your all. How much the other party actually wants to learn and is paying attention, that is up to them. So as long as you're doing your best to keep the other party engaged, especially online, it is not your responsibility to make them participate. It might be an idea to address it at the start of the session and to invite them to notify you if they do get distracted or need a break. But after that, it's up to them to actually participate and get the most out of their personal session. For the rest, you'll find doing an individual debrief online to be a very similar experience to doing one offline. For me personally, if I can choose, all other things being equal, I will always choose the offline session, just because it makes it a more personal experience. But I find doing an online one-on-one debrief to be a fine and worthwhile exercise. Keep in mind your connection and the goal of the debrief, the length of the session, the amount of breaks needed, how to share the report, and the amount of distraction a participant might have, and you should be good to go. The same goes for our next scenario, although the differences definitely do get bigger here. The team debrief. The online team debrief is definitely a client's favorite amongst our clients in the US, Canada, and Australia for two reasons. One, it obviously saves on travel expenses to fly and hostess for every session. And two, it can be very time effective for the client. Especially for management teams, it can be easier to call in from multiple locations than to try and get everyone together. We've had one case where we were at the client's office here in the Netherlands with 2 managers and have another 8 managers call in from multiple locations around the world. It took some extra work in preparation, but it turned out to be a very effective session that simply wouldn't have been possible otherwise. Again, this can be a very effective way of doing the debrief, and indeed, you can get a lot done and make it a very worthwhile use of your client's time. However, let's start off with some hesitations and limitations of doing your team debrief online. The first is obviously that there will be much less interaction and dynamics between participants than there would be when they are physically in the room together. This will not be a problem when people are discussing ideas or sharing rational insights, but when discussing something more personal reacting to each other's emotions, or working on a joint task, it is definitely something to keep in mind. Therefore, explaining the AEM-Cube or discussing strategic priorities should go fine. But if the AEM-Cube is used to resolve team tensions or solve a conflict, it might in some instances be better to plan in an offline, real-life session. I personally never had an online team session where things became emotional or the atmosphere became tense, but I do check beforehand very thoroughly what the client's goal is for the session to make sure this is not an issue that needs to be addressed during the session. Maybe this online setting also lends itself less well for that kind of interaction. It might be harder for people to really show their emotions when talking through a screen. If the goal is to surface this type of dialogue or these types of emotions, I would definitely try to find an offline alternative if possible. The second limitation or hesitation is that besides less interaction and dynamics, there will be much less room for movement. Since participants will mostly be watching their screens in a seated position, they will not be able to move around. Again, this will be fine for good, in-depth discussions around the concepts and their impacts on the team's strategy and objectives. But it will be more difficult to do team exercises, and the team's energy might be lower than otherwise. One exercise we frequently do is the 5-chair exercise, where, unsurprisingly, there are 5 chairs set up in front of the room where participants are invited to play out certain roles. This whole exercise allows people to get out of their chairs, move around, and it builds up to them actually executing different contributions to the growth curve in a visual manner. Obviously, this will be much harder to do successfully online. I have done sessions where I have participants do the exercise verbally from their own locations. And while it worked to convey the meaning, there was much less energy and laughter than you might otherwise get. Again, if your client is looking for a rational, in-depth discussion of their team composition and their strategic objectives, don't be hesitant to do it in an online session. If your client is looking to do an energetic team building session with lots of energy and people moving around, it will probably be better to look for offline alternatives. If you do decide to go for an online AEM-Cube team debrief, there are some things to keep in mind to make the session as good and worthwhile as possible. First, obviously, make sure you prepare your session as good as possible. That means choose which platform you use and communicate this clearly to the entire team. Zoom, Teams, Hangouts, LiveSize, and others are all good options. If your client proposes one, make sure you become acquainted with the platform as good as possible. Also, ask if you are hosting the session or someone from their team. Make sure you have good audio and video connections and good screen sharing capabilities. As stated in the individual debrief, if you decide to send the reports during the session, make sure you have all the emails on standby with the message typed up completely and the report attached. This way, there will be no downtime during the session. Secondly, interact. When starting the session, make sure everyone is aware of the interaction options during the session. Can they ask questions at any time? Do you want them to speak up? Is there a chat function and do you prefer them to use that? Can they virtually raise their hand, etc.? Keep in mind that participants will often be much more reactive and laid back than if they were actually present in the same room as you. This means there will often be less energy and interaction in the group, And you'll probably want to invite them to join in the discussion and interact whenever relevant or necessary. Sometimes it might feel quiet for you as a presenter, since there is much less feedback from the group. This is normal. However, it does make it necessary for you to frequently ask if everyone is engaged and check for questions and/or comments more often. I have had more sessions where the people were so quiet I had to check multiple times if my connection was still working, especially in the beginning. By making sure I asked enough questions, inviting people to join the conversation, and leaning back myself at times to give the group enough space, things would usually turn more and more energetic towards the end. Make sure you respond to questions ASAP, both questions asked verbally and those asked by chat, to encourage people to keep asking them. Finally, even though regular exercises are more difficult, there are several alternatives to consider. Use slides that pose an interesting, thoughtful, funny, or provoking question to the group in order to encourage dialogue. Use quizzes or polls if your platform allows them. Zoom does this very well, for instance. Or use a second platform such as Mentimeter to ask a question and allow people to respond anonymously by using their mobile phones. These are all fun, engaging ways to make sure you keep the attention of your audience and keep your session as fun and interactive as possible. Third, speaking about your audience's attention, just as with the one-on-one debrief, make sure you use breaks. People can only sit in one place and stare at their screens for so long, and since a team session usually runs for a few hours, make sure you plan in enough breaks. Make sure you allot enough time for breaks, and ask the group frequently about their energy level, since it might be more difficult to gauge online. Alternatively, you can also think about programming one or a few mini breakout sessions, where people can, for example, reflect on their own report or a given question, do some brainstorming, or complete another small exercise. In fact, if you choose to send a report during the session, this could be an ideal opportunity to have a short individual break and ask them to download their report and write down some initial notes and questions. This gives them something else to focus on, gives them some time away from their screen, and gives them something to work on before coming back in and resuming the discussion. Continuing on that note, just as with the individual debrief, make sure you allow more time for your online team session than you would for your offline team session. Given the previous point, the programming of your session will naturally be a little different from your offline team debriefs, given the need for more breaks and a more structured way of communicating. And it will be much more relaxing for you to take this into account, not create unnecessary tension due to timing issues. I've had multiple sessions where I just planned too much into too short of a time, and nothing is more frustrating than having to cut people off or having people becoming impatient because you're running across the deadline. If you are allotted only a short amount of time by your client, make sure you communicate the limitations clearly and adjust your goals accordingly. Take the lead, present the results, maybe do Q&A, but save the rest of your team session for a later date. Finally, think well about how you want to present the results. Assuming everyone is okay with the results being shared within the group, I always like having them present their own AEM-Cube report and share their thoughts, while I encourage the others to comment or ask questions. For this, you can ask the participants to share their own screen for a few minutes, or you can present the relevant pages of their AEM-Cube reports in your slides and share them from your end. Of course, there are many ways for people to share their results, and which one you choose will depend on your personal preferences and the team's objectives. But I like doing it this way because it creates a lot of natural interaction within the group. After this, presenting the team image can also be done in a myriad of ways. One way to do it is to first present the group without names before everyone presents their own report, and ask people to discuss who might be who and why. Again, this creates dialogue, interaction, and some natural positive tension in revealing who is who. After everyone has then presented their own report, you can share the team overview with names and take the discussion from there. Another way is to simply share the team report and ask people to engage in discussion around it, possibly with some pre-formulated questions. Or you can present the results and allow for a mini breakout session where you ask people to take some time to individually reflect on the team, write down potential strengths, challenges, and the alignment with their strategic objectives. As you can see, there are multiple ways of sharing results and encouraging dialogue in an online session. No way is the right way, so feel free to experiment with these as you go. Unlike the individual debrief, the team debrief will be significantly different online than offline. It is inherently more limited in its setup, but with the right objectives, that is, a rational, in-depth look at the concept and the team strategy and priorities, rather than something like a conflict resolution or team building exercise, the online session can be a very successful one for your team debrief. Again, all other things being equal, I will always choose the offline session, because here it makes it more personal, energetic, and engaging. And as such, it's a little easier for me as a host. However, if necessary, I won't hesitate to do the session online if the objectives allow for it. Prepare the session well. Focus on creating enough interaction. Plan in enough breaks. And allot a little extra time for your session. And think about how you'd prefer to debrief the results. And you should be able to set yourself up to deliver a very successful, worthwhile AEM-Cube team debrief completely online. This is a weird time for all of us, and it might take some time before everything goes back to completely normal. This means that you might want to look for alternative ways to conduct your coaching, consulting, and teaching work. As you've seen here, there are quite a few settings where the AEM-Cube lends itself well for online sessions, both one-on-one and in teams. Knowing how to debrief the AEM-Cube online and having some experience in it is something that will prove useful not only during this pandemic, but also afterwards, especially when working with international clients or clients located in different spaces. Don't be afraid to try it out and feel free to experiment in what works best for you. There is not one right way to do it, so if the opportunity arises, feel free to try it out and completely make it your own. Here at Human Insight, we're doing more and more work online, and we are here to help our partners to do the same. If you have any questions about working with our concepts and tools in whatever way, online or otherwise, please do not hesitate to reach out, and we'll be more than happy to think with you to find the best solution possible. For now, I hope you found these tips helpful. On behalf of the entire Human Insight team, I wish you strength, good health, and all the best through this trying time. Please take care, and we look forward to staying in touch.